when I said it wasn't racism, I mean it wasn't racism in the modern concept. There was, of course, prejudice. People were prejudiced against different people for various reasons. Skin color may have been one of those prejudices at certain points in time, but not necessarily more prevalent than national identity, language, or religion. People were more prejudiced against religion, perhaps, than skin color in 15th, 16th century England or 15th, 16th century Europe, even despite the fact of what we may talk about in the Iberian Peninsula. Iberian Peninsula is slightly different, but in England, 15th, 16th century, prejudice against religion probably was more prevalent. Prevalence or discrimination against national identity. If you were an Irishman in England in the 15th, 16th century, you might suffer more discrimination than someone of African descent. Certainly if you were an Egyptian in the 15th and 16th century, you would suffer more discrimination than you would someone of African descent. Egyptian was a term used to describe a range of people who had committed themselves to the Egyptian ideology and of being referred to as Egyptians. They were a class of nonconformist people who claimed an Egyptian heritage and claimed an African heritage, but weren't themselves African, and who believed that they were Egyptians, the first people on the face of the earth. They did not respect or pay adherence to the laws of this country. They didn't settle in one place, but moved from place to place. They respected no law except their own, did not recognize Queen Elizabeth or any of the monarchs as being their monarchs. They had their own kings, their own laws, their own regulations, and their own policies. They lived lawless lives. They took what they wanted, and they lived where they wanted to live. And these people called themselves Egyptians. These people were subject to the most overt forms of discrimination, more than any other group in 15th, 16th century English society. More laws were passed against them than any other group, even than against Catholics. And they were summarily executed in a way in which we don't find other groups being summarily executed. This is a group of people who were, if you like, the ultimate other, the ultimate stranger in 15th, 16th century England. How did the African become the ultimate other, 18th, 19th century, even some might say now, 21st century? It isn't one thing. It's a series of events, circumstances and changes taking place not only in this country, but globally throughout the world. Much of it is to do with the decline and disappearance of African civilizations. As West African, East African, to a lesser extent, North African and Southern African civilizations systematically over several hundreds of years began to decline, disappear, and then one by one became subject to control either from people coming from a different kind of radical Islamic fundamentalist ideology that encapsulated North Africa, a different kind of radical Christian European colonial identity from West European civilizations, such as England, France, Italy, etc. As that happened and Africans lost their civilizations and therefore became subject to the imperialism either of an Islamic imperialism or a Christian imperialism, that meant that the status of Africans began to decline rapidly about the 18th century. And that total collapse, except for Ethiopia, in the 19th century then led to the Berlin Conference. So what I'm saying is that then justified then the notions of scientific racism, which is a 19th century idea, and social Darwinism, which is a 19th century idea, caught up in the idea of manifest destiny that was applied to North America, but also was applied through Cecil Rhodes, etc., in the 18th and the 19th century to Africa, with an idea that the African, like the Native American, was part of the past of the human race, and the future lay with Europeans and the Asiatic people. And that the African, like the Native American, like the Aborigine, was part of the past of the human condition, and the future lay with the European and the Asiatic people. So what I am saying is that the kind of virulent modern scientific racism is an 18th, 19th century thing. That's, Galton. It's social Darwinism. It's Frederick Blumenbach. It's that type of thing. It's 18th, 19th century. It's not a 16th century thing. It's not a 15th century thing. Yeah. And it's to do actually with losing power. Once Africans began to lose power and lose identity, then it became easier to make them subject to others. Whilst Africans had power, it was not possible to subjugate them in that way, nor no need to. Africanus.